So as manufacturers, it's very important for us to get on the bandwagon with the sustainable agenda, but there's also a lot of greenwash around. So how do you, as specifiers, know what genuinely is a sustainable product, and how do you ensure that that's the one that gets specified?
With great difficulty. I'm not sure about how you come to specify things. It generally is either a thorough research, it's been tried and tested, it's gone through the mill previously, and we know there's a chain of custody there that supports the product successfully. Whether there should be anything else that's there, I don't know whether there is a stamp that could be applied to it. What would be very useful from a specification point of view, most of you use NBS, the National Building Specification Tool, whether they ought to go around and go, it's a broad area to cover, a huge marketplace to cover, but whether they give it some rating. Years ago there used to be the Green Guide to Specification, where you could quite easily pick up it wasn't so much a component but an element of a building, whether it's a wall, whether it's a roof, and if you chose this particular not product but element or component, it will give you a grading, and therefore that was our Bible, if you like, our go-to for a quick reference.
Yeah, I mean, it's still there online. They've got great long lists of, A's and A+ kind of construction sort of systems. At the end of the day, though, I think, very often as architects, we're not purely looking for just a purely sustainable building. There are always other factors that matter. So I think it's always a matter of, where are the priorities, and you want something which is as sustainable as possible, but there are always other factors. And what we don't necessarily tend to worry about too much is necessarily the delivery time when you're initially specifying it. Although, on a smaller project, it probably is on a project where the time frame is, in the next 6 months or a year. But where you're talking about big projects that are 2-3 years down the line, that's less of an issue. But I think increasingly sustainability is part. One of the issues is how local is it? Where is it being manufactured? And if it's being manufactured close to the site, particularly for a heavy project, then that's a positive. So I don't think that there's maybe in finishes, internal finishes and things, you might be looking at something where actually, products are clearly, they might be similar, but there's clear differences in terms of their sustainability. But very often I think, there are other factors which make that decision. But greenwashing is a real issue. It's amazing, every product out there, every material now has found some way that they're sustainable.
It's interesting what you're saying about distance. We, some years ago, were digging sand and gravel right here next to our plant, but we hadn't ticked all the boxes that we needed to. We were also importing material from China, and the Chinese manufacturer had ticked all the boxes, and from a sustainability tick box point of view, it was better for us to bring the material from China than from next to the plant. Yeah. Which has just got to be crazy.
Well, it is, and again, prior to starting, we were talking about the sort of timber specification. We are satisfied as designers to see that FSC certification, but actually it could be coming from Siberia, so we're not taking into account shipping costs or the journey by road. And therefore, holistically, there needs to be some way of being able to assess this. And going back to the BRE Green Guide specification, whether it's the Bible, the hard book, or whether it's online, I'm not entirely convinced that they've gone to that level, that depth of research to determine whether it's taken into account and wastage. Obviously, they're considering from a recyclability point of view, but I'm talking about wastage in terms of the manufacturing process. You're very good here, and lots of manufacturers are, in being able to recycle their material if it's of a particular quality or fails to meet a certain grade. But in some industries, that's not even taken into account. So that level of transparency needs to be sent through to all parties, not just as as designers, but it needs to be across the board. There needs to be somewhere, whether it's a centralised point where it can be held. Who who is responsible for that is a different matter.
Yeah, I think recycling is a really important aspect now. Finding uses for old materials and being able to reuse it. I think steel is now that's becoming much more of a focus, because steel is obviously massively carbon intensive as well. So I think that is increasingly a use, and I know that obviously it's something that you've used for a long time, but finding new materials as we go forward that you can use in your blocks will, I think, be a real help in terms of making sure that digging holes and pulling stuff out of the ground doesn't become
from our perspective
too expensive.
it's twofold for us. So you've got the sustainable product, so how sustainable is that product when it's been used in the building, and then you've got sustainable construction, which is, I might have the best sustainable product in the market, but if I've got to travel it 550 miles to get to you, it then becomes a non-sustainable product by the fact that you've used so much carbon to get there in the first place. So you almost have. I can see the confusion from your side, because it's like, I've got this really great product, but if I transport it to where I want it to be, it's then not. So I'm better off to have a compromise with a product closer to the location, because overall it's actually a better product to use. And how are you meant to judge that without knowing the geography, the product, the means of getting it there and back? If we suddenly went on water to you, it'd be a lot cheaper from a sustainable perspective to do it. So there is a lot of confusion in how you define your sustainable credentials, as much as what those standards are. Now, you could look at trade bodies that say, so like you said, you've got the FSC for timber. That's a recognised standard. Could concrete block manufacturers with their trade bodies have a standard? Those are the sort of things that yourselves, the contractors and the clients are looking for, that says, I just want something where I can benchmark what I've got. So I know with some faith and confidence that what is stated that manufacturer A is providing me is benchmarked against the same way as manufacturer B is providing me.
But does your block, the governing body for sorry, excuse me.
Something like the Concrete Block Association.
Okay, CBA. So are they actually putting something into place? Is there something in place?
So I don't want to commit, because they might well be.
Right.
But I can't say for here and now that I know they are. But they're the sort of things that maybe the manufacturers should be driving, rather than the body driving to the manufacturer. We should be saying, look, we all agree that we are in competition with each other. I want to be competitive with my competition on a level playing field. I don't want to be sat down here thinking I'm really competitive because I've set myself this bar and someone else has set their bar there. I want us to have the same bar, so you on your side of the table go, yep, absolutely, I can understand now where the concrete block manufacturers are coming from, as you have done with timber. And that, even if it is different to glass, to fixture and fittings and everything else, as long as that particular category is being benchmarked the same way.
I suppose the difficulty is that you will then not have the level of technology or the advancement with the technology that's involved with either processing the product that you're doing, because everyone's going to go, well, we're all the same, and that's what we're going to churn out.
And that's where we used to have, like you said, we used to have trade or trade declarations, didn't we? We always used the trade norm, and now we're moving to EPDs, which means that we can provide you with our own personal or company credentials. But EPDs you can go to a multitude of different EPD companies to accredit what you're doing. So from your side, you go, that's great, but
how confident are you that it's been assessed appropriately?
It's standard, isn't it? It's a standard EPD that covers concrete blocks. But I think the great thing is that you're talking about everybody's trying to find ways of actually being more sustainable now. So that's a real positive. And there are certain manufacturers of products who will have an advantage. Whether it's because their forest that they're making their furniture out of is next door, or because they're next to a canal and can take it downstream. Whatever, people are looking to find those advantages and work with that. And I think it's those things that sometimes it sounds like a bit of a gimmick or whatever, but actually can make a real difference. It can be a selling point. I think there are going to be manufacturers who are struggling to find some sort of positive, and they're going to have to work a lot harder, and they might not achieve the same levels as everybody else, but they're going to improve the standard that they're at, and they're going to be moving. And then it requires the government to set, sort of legislation to set a benchmark. Say, well, if you can't get to this level, we're never going to get to the 2030 sort of targets, and you're just going to have to stop working, and it's that kind of pushing up from the bottom. I think, and there'll be people out the front, and hopefully, if their product's popular and their cost is competitive, then that'll be the people.
No, from a manufacturer's point of view, if I've got the same specification or standard as other block manufacturers, I've got the quality of equal or better than my competitors, but then I have sustainable credentials that are superior to them. The question then is, how much more expensive can that block be before it becomes a non-block? If that makes sense. It's like, so ideally, you want it the same. You want to be I want the same cost, but I want the sustainable credentials, and we're all going to aim. And in 20, 25 years, maybe sooner, we might get there. But
well, it's not might. We have to get there. I think
innovation is going to cost money to happen. Therefore, it has an impact on cost. But if we're talking 3 or 4%, you'll go, no, I can squeeze that one through. If you say 15, 20%, you go, oh, I'm not sure now. If I said 30%, you go, no, not a chance. Not a chance of that happening. So,
but there are other variables that creep into that as well, Nick. You've got, as is being experienced at the moment, people are paying hand over fist for materials. So it's being led a different route. It's the procurement route that's key. We need it now. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute they're turning a blind eye, and we don't care where it comes from and how it's manufactured. There is still a responsibility there, but it's the price is not the driving force.
Not the first question.
No. And therefore, I suspect that has always been the case pretty much when it comes to any green accreditation that's given to a particular material. It's been sitting there. It's always looming in the background. We as designers know that we have a responsibility to ensure that we put that forward as a solution or as a product that should be used. But invariably, it's going to be, well, what's available and how much is it? So therefore, very quickly, I know we've come full circle in terms of the conversation, but unfortunately, unless there is this pushing that needs to be done, 5% is going to be palatable. I would have thought in overall costs, there can be savings that can be found elsewhere. But unless you're actually getting to the point where, when it does creep up to 10% or 15%, there is no wriggle room. That's what you've got to use. That's what's got to be specified, and it's got to run all the way through the project and get delivered at the other end. Whether there are cost benefits or not, because we just can't carry on in the way that we're doing at the moment. One of the things that we were talking about outside, in terms of your raw materials, where they're coming from, at some point they'll become you go out and there isn't going to be anything left out there. So we're then having to look at biogenetics or biogen type materials, and that's available now, but it's very costly. And yes, you can have it so that it is carbon absorbing, which is fantastic. So there's a win-win scenario there. But the cost for that is huge. It's immense. And it's still got to go through its testing process as well in terms of its structural integrity, if we're talking about block work. And that's the difficult that we're all faced with. We have an ideal, of course we want to be able to specify this, but as it goes through the system, there is always going to be variables, facets that creep in that prevent it potentially of being laid if it's a block, being nailed if it's a piece of timber, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I mean, from a block specific point of view, non-cementitious material is the next big goal for someone, and then being able to scale it up.
Yes.
That's not only to have the like you are with Biogen. It's not so much the innovation itself; it's the ability to scale it up and quickly to enable the industry to adopt it. And that's, I think, for our block manufacturer, that's the next big step. If there's a eureka moment in our industry, it will be to be able to make blocks without cement. Now, that almost sounds counterintuitive at this moment in time because it's one of the constituents. But going forward, that will be the biggest carbon and sustainable leap
Huge,
that blocks
yes.
can make. And then you get into the ready
You know,
concrete, poured concrete, all the materials you use in a construction that have got cement in it, that can all be converted. That's the first biggest, and to me, that's non-cementitious for block and the alternative to fuel to get it there. They're the two big.
But in terms of media, this is going back to education, I suppose. But in terms of media, everyone is acutely aware of travel, the carbon footprint that we leave, driving cars, going away on a holiday, taking flights, whatever it may be. But I don't think generally public are aware of how much energy is consumed to create housing. That's only most recent as it's starting to be fed through. Concrete, cementitious products, that's the second most consumed resource globally.
On the planet. Yeah.
It's not travel. We all, from building homes, the impact of building homes is great. It's been within our, we're aware of it because we're in the building industry, building professionals, manufacturing, whatever it may be. We're aware of it, but I'm not sure that's trickled down to the person that's turning the key into their new home. They want to make sure their appliances are A-rated, and perhaps they want to make sure now that they've got a plug-in supply to charge their vehicle, and they know that they haven't got a gas boiler. But what they don't know is how much energy's gone into the manufacturing of brickwork, in blockwork, in everything else, the plasterboard, the plaster, everything else that goes into it. Nor are they acutely aware of how much water goes into the building as well.
No,
it's only when you do individual level in homes and you sort of say to people, actually there's an awful lot of water that comes into your home, to whether it be the mortar, whether it be the plaster, whether it be the paintwork, all of these things. You need to allow the building to dry out naturally. Don't force it, because it will shrink and you'll have all sorts of problems. So there is an educational level, and it's not just within the profession, within that industry environment. I think it needs to go further afield. There needs to be a lot more, whether it's in print, whether it's on television, whether it's media attention. Now, I guess what's good about this, because it will be posted, and people may just pick up on the fact, and therefore they become a little more socially aware of what their commitments need to be. I don't know. That's an ideal.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to, on top of that, I think people are aware of, of the amount of, building that happens, and I think they perhaps haven't related it to energy in the same way, but there are plenty of people there who are afraid that, the country's being overrun with, with buildings and things.
But that's only, I would suggest that's only a loss of land.
Yeah, exactly.
Loss of green
That's all
space.
they're interested in, really, is that loss of green space, which is and we were talking an awful lot about, energy and carbon, but sustainability is a massive subject, and it involves they're all interlinked, and it comes back to the sort of things that I think we were aware of when we were being educated, about the environment and and the biodiversity and so on, and those impacts. And I think that the real challenge is going to be actually for people to accept that, it's going to be a different, we're going to have to live differently. Yeah, and everybody knows about flying around the world, but nobody really wants to give up their holidays. No. Which is fair enough. And maybe one day, there will be, low energy fuels that can get airplanes around the world.